The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Lighting Controls Podcast. Here we are, the 50th episode. Before we jump into everything and reflect back on the last 12 to 14 months or so, just want to take a minute to remind everyone that today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. If you haven't checked out our website out by now, this is our 50th episode, so you've been missing a lot of great content, but check it out. We've got all of our episodes and news feed and a merch store if you want to support the podcast. But at any rate, this episode, we're going to have a special guest for everybody. But before we hop into that, Ron and I just wanted to do a quick recap on everything. I mean, Ron, it's been a crazy over year, almost 14 months of nonstop content, where we've just gone through the gamut of things. I mean, it's surprising to see that we're at 50 episodes at this point.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's been a ton of fun, and to think that it started, officially launched 14 months ago, but we did 6 or so episodes before that.
Right.
On the Get a Grip platform. So it's just it's amazing to see how much has transpired and what we've done, and just really can't thank everyone enough, from the
Oh,
sponsors
totally.
to our listeners, all our guests. It's been absolutely amazing, and it's very humbling to have everyone on and have some of these people in the industry that are just absolutely just phenomenal people and phenomenal guests. And I've made some great friendships through this already as well, and it's just been
Likewise.
it's been it's been great, man.
Yeah, and a big shout out to the Get a Grip guys as well. I mean, this kind of started as a pipe dream for anybody curious the backstory of the Lighting Controls podcast. I worked through the Agora, and Tom Butters connected me with Michael Colligan, and Michael basically said, "Okay, we'll give you 15 minutes, and if it stinks, we're not going to air it, and if it's cool, then we'll air it." And I was like, "Okay, cool." And so then I brought you in as a guest. And then after listening to the two of us, Michael was like, "Okay, I'm going to make a podcast with the two of you guys as co-hosts." And I was like, "Sure, why not?" So, that the whole evolution of this podcast has really been a fantastic ride. And I'm very curious to see where it goes. Another thing that you and I have been working on is a committee through NAILD. And it's
Yes.
for the integrators and startup techs out there. We will definitely have more information as it develops, but that's really in its infancy right now. But anybody listening who wants to get involved in this committee, please reach out to us. Contact information for us is on the website. But it's really kind of fascinating to see the community that is developing around this podcast.
Yeah, no, it's been great to see everything sort of transpire and develop, and to see how much content is truly out there, and just
Yeah.
how much I've personally learned from other people, especially around Dolly. That was a subject that I did not spend a lot of time with. But just to see the varying, not only opinions, but the way things are
Hmm.
handled in different parts of the country. You and I, both being based in New England, we're very stuck in this bubble. So
Right.
it's fascinating to see the way things are handled out in LA, out in Chicago, and just the varying degrees to how things are done, the interaction with
Hmm.
reps in those various
Yeah.
areas, and just to get different opinions from everyone on how how reps interact in different parts of the country, and how they
Right.
play with the manufacturers and with dealers or distributors. And there's still so much to get to, and it's amazing to think, like, there are
Yeah.
so many people we haven't talked to yet, and
I
it's just
know.
it's unreal.
Well, and that I think that's the funny thing is, every now and then we'll reach out to somebody and they'll say, "I don't really know if there's enough to talk about it for a whole episode," and it's just sort of like, no, you'll be surprised. As soon as you start talking, it just keeps going and going, and we have to stop the conversation in a lot of cases and end prematurely because we just don't have enough time to take it all in. So, we're gonna have recurring guests in the new year. We're gonna have more deep dive subjects. We're gonna hopefully do a little bit more fun stuff that's out of the box for how we do these podcast episodes. But you're right. There's still so many people that we haven't interviewed, especially types of people like contractors. We really haven't had a chance to get contractors to weigh in to the conversation. And I think that that's a more of a statement on availability than anything, because contractors lately have just been so stretched and so under demand. But at the same time, I think there's also a lot of people who worry about shoving their foot in their mouth. And that's one of the things that, I hope we've done a good job of not mocking anybody or making anybody feel like they have said something wrong. I mean, we're all learning, we're all trying to figure this out. And so, I think I really appreciate everybody's willingness to be vulnerable on this show.
Yeah, and I'm very open to everyone's opinions, right? Like I said, I'm very focused in my bubble, and I'm very open to other opinions, especially as the industry continues to grow, because the demand for lighting controls, startup technicians, and people who can handle those integrations is just going to shoot through the roof, and it's going to continue to grow and grow and grow, and this conversation is going to continue. And as that all transpires, there's just you kind of have to check your ego at the door and realize that people may have a better way of doing something than you, or a different way you hadn't even considered. And that's been
Totally.
one of the biggest things for me. Is it's not necessarily that someone has a better idea, it's they have a different way of approaching it that I hadn't considered in the past, that makes me think about things differently, especially with this industry. And
Totally.
it's so important to get all those different opinions from everyone and educate yourself.
100%. And so on that topic, we have a special guest for everybody. He actually has been listening to every single one of our episodes. He is our biggest fan, whether he wants to be or not. Scott, he's the producer in the background. He is the omnipresent voice in our heads as we're going through the recordings. He guides us through everything. We could not do this show without you, Scott. And so thank you for
Well, you literally couldn't, because I press record.
exactly. So the reason why we have you on, I mean, Ron and I were like, okay, what are we going to do for a 50th episode? And it was just sort of like, you know what? This guy's, he's not in our industry at all. He listens to everything we say, and sometimes more than once, because he has to edit these episodes. And
Yep.
so just wanted to get, you're basically like our expert layman. And we wanted to get your input on what you think is going on in the lighting controls industry, or just any thoughts or questions that have come up throughout the time that you've been working with us.
Well, I when you say I listen to every episode, I kind of listen to every episode, because sometimes it's like, what are they talking about? 0 to 10 volt and dolly and I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough.
But I've learned a couple of things, because we have to at 50 episodes or 49 episodes. But I mean, you two certainly sound like you know what you're talking about. You're the experts. I don't know. I mean, I kind of want to ask you:
Yeah.
Are controls catching on? Are they taking off? Is it going to be a thing?
I mean, it's a great question. And for anybody who's paying attention, I mean, it really is kind of two approaches. It seems like there's the energy code requirements that are forcing people to adopt lighting controls, and there is the advantages and alluring components of lighting controls that draw people in. And it seems as though there's really two frames of thought. There is, you can either do code minimum and really just shoot for the cheapest, most easy to implement, quote unquote, option, or you can really go for a holistic approach and try to provide a quality lighting control solution, or even a fully integrated building automation solution. And I would say that the majority of projects are on the first part, where where it's just code minimum, and that's because
Yep.
energy code in the commercial side is really driving that conversation. I don't know if
Yeah.
Ron
And
has anything to add to that.
I hate that it's forced, right? That's probably the thing that I hate the most, is the fact that people feel that it is forced, as you said, Webster, and because
Right.
it shouldn't be. But I feel a lot of a lot of the reasoning behind why people feel that way is because they've had bad experiences in the past, whether
Totally.
it was a system that wasn't quite up to snuff, or they didn't have a specialist on board to handle the integration and to actually do the startup, and it was being done by someone who maybe wasn't properly trained, or however the ball got dropped, right? We've all heard the stories. We've shared many on this show. I'm sure there's many, many more that we'll hear throughout however many episodes there are in the future. And it's just, I feel like that's the biggest reason people feel that it's forced, is that they've had a bad experience and they don't want to do it, rather than embracing it and understanding there really is something here. And I really do feel personally that home automation is the biggest stepping stone to getting people to not feel forced with controls, because home
Totally.
automation has become so easy. The fact that you can just pick up your phone and through any of the various apps, and you can talk to your speakers and your lights and this, and everything's Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and it's very easy to set up, and the apps are super user friendly. And if we could take just some of that, and I know it's not quite the same, but take some of that ease of use and bring it into the commercial sector, I really feel like there'd be more adoption.
Now you say ease of use. So I've got Hey Google. All those people out there are now turning off their Google feed. And turn on my living room light, turn on the kitchen.
Right.
And sometimes it goes wrong, and then it's like, I can't remember which app connects to this light and this light, because I got a Philips here and I got a whatever here. And now you put these into a 25-story office building, a new office building. Yeah. I can't. I mean, you guys are the experts, but I can't wrap my head around how you even begin to plan something like that without at the end the owner going, "Nah, I don't like it."
Yeah, totally. Well, and I think right there is part of the problem. I think one of the major differences between residential and commercial is consumer driven versus code driven. So, everything somebody puts in their house is because they want it to be there. And so if we start saying, hey, you can do, Alexa in your 25-story office building, maybe there will be somebody out there who goes, oh yeah, that's a really cool idea. I love that. Let's do this. But the majority of people are going to be like, what? And to your point, I think, from the layman's perspective, it's like, where do you even start with that? Like, how do you even get to that solution? And there is certainly a heavy lift. And I mean, people like Ron, integrators out there, are part of that discussion for sure. But I think we're definitely not anywhere near a point where somebody can just order an Alexa for a 25-story building and plug it in and be done.
Imagine that chaos.
I know.
Yeah.
So have you ever finished a job and the end user is not really pleased with it, didn't like it? Can you change it?
Ron, I'm going to punt that one over to you because you're the one who usually deals with that conversation more than me. But
yeah. It happens. It does happen, and sometimes it doesn't happen because of anything you did as the contractor or as the startup technician. Sometimes they're not happy with
or whatever.
Right. Sometimes they're just not happy with the way the product performs, or this or that, or how it was specified, and there's nothing I can do to fix that. All I can do is listen to them and try to talk to them early and often, right? We try to get in front of the owner as soon as we get involved in a project to understand their needs, so that if there is something where it's like, hey, if we just change this one thing, we could really meet the need that they want. And so we try to get in front of it, but you can't always do that. So when you can't, our goal is to give them the warm and fuzzies and really give them the best system that we can with what they have. And sometimes sometimes you do have to make compromises. Sometimes you can't give them everything they want, but you give them 80 or 90% of what they want. And you have to
Well,
work through that with them and explain it.
to jump off of that as well, to address the question of can you change it? I mean, in a lot of cases, you can't change the hardware. You
Right.
can change the software,
Mhm.
but how you can change the software really depends on whether it was custom from the beginning or whether it was out of the box from the beginning. Because if it was custom from the beginning, Ron probably was already programming that custom graphical user interface from the beginning and can go in and edit it. But if it's out of the box, it's locked to a certain functionality, and to create a custom at that point would be an added expense to the project. And at that point, you've already developed an angry owner, and to go back to them and say, well, it's going to cost more now, is usually not going to result in a furthered relationship. It's probably going to be like, well, then I'm just going to hate this for the rest of my life, and you're going to go down with that name. And so it really becomes this complex challenge of, at the how early in the project were you introduced, and how involved was the owner in that conversation at the beginning? Because
Right.
it's
Those
like
are
going,
those are a couple of things I picked up in 50
yeah,
episodes. Communicate and educate
yes,
everyone
100%.
involved. Yeah.
And that's something that we definitely are always striving to do better. And this industry could definitely use a lot of things like consensus of terminology,
Yep.
educational materials that are unified in direction, and just improved awareness and outreach to the end users so that they know what to expect. Because I think, even yesterday, I was talking to somebody about an occupancy sensor, and they were explaining to me why they're a terrible idea. And it's like, okay, that's really interesting to hear why you think an occupancy sensor is a terrible idea. And their concept was based around PIR only sensors, where line of sight is the only detection method. And as a result, yeah, of course, if you have, and they were also thinking wall boxes. So it's just taking this place of a switch. So if you're around a corner, if the geometry of the space is weird, that sensor is not going to be able to pick up everything. And additionally, if the space is too big, it's not even going to be able to detect far enough away. And so as a result, yeah, of course, the lights are going to shut off on the person, or maybe never turn on to begin with. And so, there's a lot of people who just develop these ideas of like an occupancy sensor is a terrible thing to use. And it's like, no. A poorly implemented occupancy sensor is a terrible thing to use. But that's the case with anything. I mean, we don't ride horses anymore for the most part to go grocery shopping. And the reason why that is because it's inefficient in comparison to a car or a bus. And so, same thing with technology. Technology evolves over time and improves. So the fact that people think that lighting controls technology is static and has never changed since the 1980s is a little foolish, but that's on us that we have not
Yeah.
conveyed that information in a way that end users have heard.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I don't consider some of these things being in the industry, right? I hear occupancy sensor and I instantly go to dual tech. I don't even think
Yes.
about it. But
Right.
your average consumer at, say, the big box store, who's picking up a switch, like you said, a switch with the sensor built into it, it's a motion sensor. They don't understand that there's passive infrared and that there's ultrasonic. They have no idea, right? There's a motion sensor built into this switch, and if I'm around the corner, it doesn't work. And yeah, a lot of
Well, and
that does stem back to education.
I think the other thing is, in certain cases, it's when the adage of, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. There are a lot of manufacturers that have PIR only sensors, and they don't have
Yep.
a secondary solution to that. And while there's arguments to be made for doing it that way, and I'm not going to dispute that, it just, to say that this is the only option available because this is the only option we have is a little bit of a disservice, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's true, and you don't consider it, but like the classic example is like the bathroom. You can put passive infrared sensors in, but if you don't put them over the stalls, they're going to turn the lights off on
Yep.
people.
Yep.
Been
And
there,
everybody
had
has
it
a story
happen.
about that.
Yeah,
Like,
there's one.
True.
There's one in the bathroom here. If you spend too long on your phone, it goes out on you. You got to
Oh
wave
yeah.
your arms.
There you go. Well, we should get your studio fitted out with better occupancy sensor layout then.
Oh no, I've got a fake skylight in here that feels like a real skylight. It's awesome.
Nice.
Thousands of dollars, but I didn't pay for it. Okay, I have another question for you.
Yeah, go for it.
Will AI find its way into controls? I mean, it's going to find its way into everything eventually.
Yeah.
Yes. Exactly.
What specifically about AI are you thinking? Because there's, as we've discussed a couple of times, there's a variance of definitions when it comes to AI. And so there's...
I mean, I guess... well, yeah, I mean, really, that's a big question. What is AI? But, can it be built into occupancy sensors where it understands that someone's walked around the corner and gone to the washroom, so it's not going to turn out the lights yet? That kind of thing, maybe.
I think so. I think that's, we've interviewed a couple of manufacturers who have already started discussing that. Toggled comes to mind, where they were talking about machine learning and getting that kind of data to be driving the lighting control solution. And I think that may be one of the solutions to a lot of misconceptions and issues that people have with lighting controls, which is I have to go through 5 layers of app design to get to turn the lights on. And it's like, yeah, that's a real inconvenience. I mean, you should just be able to walk into the space and the light should know what you need.
Yeah.
And that's what AI could do, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it's not AI, right? There's a lot of devices that have adaptive learning currently, right? So people may confuse that right out of the box for AI, and it's not the same, but there are. I mean, there's a lot of devices, a lot of motion sensors that will continue to learn your patterns. So depending on when you install them, we saw a lot of this with COVID. People would install all these devices. There wasn't a lot of traffic. There weren't a lot of people around. The sensors adjusted their timeouts to a lower time. There was less traffic. They adjusted everything. And then all of a sudden, people started coming back to the offices and things weren't working right because the sensors needed to relearn the new traffic patterns and amount of people. And so they're adaptive. It's not AI, right? So it doesn't learn as quickly. It definitely takes time. Sometimes you need to go to the devices and really give them a hard reset and set them back to their out of the box mode to start the adaptive learning over again when things like that happen.
So there's really, I mean, there may be some AI deep in a Colorado military mountain, but there's really no AI yet. It's really just machine learning at this point, right?
Yeah. And I mean, even
Chat GPT, right?
Exactly.
It's just learning.
Yeah. It's just taking a database of information and regurgitating. I mean, true AI, I think you're right. Yeah, we're not even close to that yet for consumer level. And so, and we see lighting controls kind of take a slower pace to most technology out there. There is so much available, but it's a question of how do we market it and how do we utilize it in a way, because lighting is such a small industry in comparison to other industries, and so we're dependent on the technology that other industries can provide. The reason why we have a weird chip setup for our LEDs in some cases is because we need to source them from other places. I mean, the original red LED chip that we used in color changing fixtures came from stoplights because that was the one that was mass produced and cheap enough for us to incorporate into our fixtures.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so there's just the lime green chip or the mint green chip that a lot of color changing groups use to make their colors more vibrant comes from dental industry. They mass produce it for curing the molds in your teeth. So like we don't create our own stuff. We repurpose other people's stuff.
Pull it together.
Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting.
It's fascinating as you,
Didn't know
there's
some
so
of
many
that.
layers. I know. There's so many layers to everything that we do, and so like the sensors that we use, it's because we've sourced a mass production source for it. It's not because we're going. There's a huge demand for passive infrared sensors. We're going to create these out of scratch. We're going to have to find somebody to that is already producing those.
Yeah. That's true
Yeah,
of
the
just
only
about anything, really, right? I mean,
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the only thing in the lighting industry that's really, really mass produced is the fixtures, right? And in a lot of cases, it's the 2x4 troffers for your office space, right? If you
Right.
think about it like a faucet, every house has at least one. Every office has, right? Most people have multiple. We've got the kitchen, the bathroom, this, that. There's millions and millions and millions of those out there, and there is the same for light fixtures, but it's not true for controls. Specialty fixtures, a lot of the color changing manufacturers. I mean, if you looked at the revenue versus their big brothers and sisters in the commercial
Yeah.
industry, it's peanuts. It's
Yeah.
absolute peanuts.
Yeah, and even further, when you look at the revenue strain based on whether you're OEMing components versus you're actually manufacturing it yourself, I mean, there are some groups out there that do build their own stuff, even right down to the chips on the LEDs. And their overhead is massive because of
Mhm.
that. And so the cost of that fixture is massive. There's a reason, the argument is it's a higher quality fixture, everything's done in the US, like they're really reliable. But it's sort of like, okay, dealing with people who are like, do I really need to spend $1 million on my lights? Because again, when we're looking at it from a holistic perspective in a building, it might be a multi-billion-dollar building, but lighting is such a small portion of that in ownership's minds that it's like, yeah, you really need to make an argument for why you need the best of the best for this building.
yeah, my employees can just walk in and flick a switch.
Exactly, and that's the mentality that we're in a lot of cases having to change, because they're going, well, I can trust my employees to shut my lights off, so I don't need this occupancy sensor. It's like,
No.
I love that you're willing to believe that, or at least that's the argument you're creating so that you can justify a cheaper option. But at the same time, it's like,
This is why
study.
billion birds a year die crashing
Yes.
into buildings at night because the lights are left on.
Yep.
Yeah. And so on top of that, it just makes me think of survival. What is it? Survivor bias, where people look at the evidence that's in front of them and don't consider the alternative evidence. So survivor bias comes from this mathematical result during World War II, where they were trying to study these planes and how they could make them better to not get shot down, because they were losing hundreds and hundreds of planes. And so they were looking at the planes that came back, and they got a bunch of statisticians in to take a look at it, and they studied the aircraft, and instead of reinforcing where all the bullet holes were, they reinforced the points where there were no bullet holes, because those were the ones that survived. And so the ones that survived indicate where, if they did get hit, they most likely would have gone down. And so,
right, that makes sense.
exactly.
Yeah.
But people don't think about that, because they go, well, there's a bunch of bullet holes here, so obviously we need to reinforce where the bullet holes are.
Yeah, but they came back.
Yeah, exactly. So survivor bias is a real issue, and in a lot of cases, people love to think anecdotally about their own stuff, where it's like, well, I shut my lights off, and it's like, no, you remember shutting your lights off, but did you actually shut your lights off?
Yeah, yeah. So that was kind of one of the other questions I had. Kind of relates.
Mm-hmm.
If
Go
I'm
for it.
I'm a building owner, why spend $1 million? But if I spend that $1 million, what happens in 10 or 20 years?
Ron, you want to take that one?
It's a great question, but the same could be said not only about lighting, but anything in that building.
Well, that's true.
HVAC,
Yeah.
right. Everything has some sort of a lifespan.
Yeah. Right.
Any mechanical part has some sort of a lifespan, and yes, lights aren't necessarily mechanical per se, but it's the same thing. The LEDs have a half-life. Now, I love that manufacturers love to throw out the numbers for how long their product is going to last. At the end of the day, that LED is going to last a very, very long time. 9 times out of 10, the failure, probably 99 out of 100, the failure is the driver, the power supply. That's the device that fails, not the LEDs, right? It's always some sort of component like that. And the argument for 10 or 20 years down the road is that technology is going to be so outdated. They're going to want to update it anyway. So yes, it's tough to understand the argument, and especially with LED now, the ROI is very different, right? When you were going from metal halides and all the fluorescence and everything, it was very easy to sell ROI with the LED fixtures. Now you're going LED to LED. That argument is gone, right? So now we're really talking about controls and how we can get more out of the building. And that's where we really need to focus on that holistic approach and realize that it's not just the lighting controls anymore. If we're going to get savings out of the building, it has to come from the entire building. And this is really going to come to a head at some point with electrification, as we see more and more, EV and the need for that power. The grid as it stands today, if everyone had an EV, can't handle it. Physically cannot. And it's going to take a long time to fix the infrastructure to do that. And it's going to be billions and billions and billions of dollars, probably trillions of dollars to actually fix all that infrastructure. And the only way we're going to be able to support some of these lofty goals that people have for the next 10 or 20 years is going to be able to control entire buildings to pull demand down.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and on top of all of that, I mean, it's not just that lighting controls are you buy it and you're done. I mean, lighting controls are nowadays a living entity that is in your building. I mean, again, if you look at just a rocker switch, sure, that's it. It's just this cutoff for a circuit. Whereas lighting controls nowadays, at least for the commercial side, are very complex programs. And so to just go, okay, it's $1 million and I'm done and I'm never going to think about it again, that's pretty short-sighted and inaccurate in my opinion, because, when do you buy a car and you never have to put another dollar into it? You have to maintain the things that you own. And so, there's so much perspective in our disposable consumer mentality that, I'll just buy it and then replace it at some point. It's like, no, you could buy it and maintain it and it'll last you forever. You just have to maintain it. I have a vacuum cleaner that's 20 years old that I still use, and I replace the motor and I replace the components when they go bad. Have I spent the amount that I would have spent on a brand new vacuum cleaner over time? Absolutely. Does that mean that I should have just thrown the vacuum cleaner out when it broke? No. I maintain it and I keep it, and it works great. It's an excellent vacuum cleaner. So
the key is when you're putting in controls on the lighting system is to make everything accessible, like make the drivers accessible so that if it goes out, you can pull it out and put another one in.
Yes.
Don't plant it into the cement and never get at it.
Hopefully we're not seeing that happen. I mean, basically, if you bury your driver in cement, that's a code violation.
No, well, okay. What do I know?
But you're right. I mean, there are fixtures out there that it's impossible to pull apart without voiding the warranty. And so as a result, that's definitely a consideration to keep in mind, is like, okay, do I need to replace the whole fixture if it goes bad, or can I pull it apart on my own, or have my in-house electricians do the work and repair this? Or does it need to go back to the factory to be repaired?
Yeah, and we look at some of these fixtures. Yeah, we look at some fixtures that are installed at various places and installed in hard ceilings, right? Plaster ceilings, drywall. And you look at the fixture and you go, you can't get that back out of the ceiling if you needed to. You literally can't. The way that fixture is installed, there is no way to service that without cutting a hole back in the ceiling. And now you're making a bigger repair. So and I get it. A lot of it is about aesthetics and size of the aperture, and they're focused on very specific things from an aesthetic point of view. And then that's what designers love. And I understand all of that, but you can't service the fixture without having to physically cut it out and pull it down. And then that ceiling is no, I don't care how good you are. You're always going to kind of know that something happened there. And like Webster made the point about his vacuum, it's easy to still get motors, right? I mean, you see the cars on the road from the
Right.
50s and earlier, and you can still get parts. May not be the exact part, but you can get
Right.
parts. In some of these cases, especially with COVID, some of these chips just physically don't exist. You
Right.
can't fix some of these fixtures if you wanted to. And that's a big thing, especially with fixtures 10, 20 years down the road, is there's a high likelihood you can't fix it and you have to replace it.
And
That's
the same is true about controls. I just want to, make sure that our listeners see the
Yes.
adjacency here, because we're talking about fixtures. But I mean, this is lighting controls. We've seen throughout the last year instances of things being bricked or systems going
Oh,
down,
absolutely.
and the manufacturer folding and saying it's out of our hands. Like, we can't do anything. We don't have any money. And as a result, that's the whole argument to be made about proprietary versus open standards. If you are locked into an ecosystem of some kind and that manufacturer folds, you have to replace the whole system.
hmm
for 100 years you could unscrew your dead light bulb and screw in another one, and you're set. You're all set. And now this
Yes.
is and
Well,
they've gone LED to reduce energy, but now there's going to be a pile of garbage. So
yeah.
you've replaced one with another.
Well, and I think that is also on us as an industry, because
Yeah.
we did not make it end user friendly. We focused more on the price point and the success of the product, and less on the end user utilization. Yeah, we have retrofit LED lamps that take the place of a socket, but have we really improved upon the model other than energy efficiency? In a lot of ways, we've gone backwards. We have issues with compatibility and dimmers. So, yeah, we really need to be kinder to the end user than I think we are right now.
You're getting up to 37 minutes. I didn't think this would go so long.
You fell into the same trap that everybody falls into.
Yeah. And your
Yeah.
your fellow experts out there are going to be, who's this guy? I don't care what he says.
Well, I hope that's not the case. I mean, that's one of the things that I always say is, it doesn't matter who it is. They always have something to bring to the table. There's, you may not be an expert in the field, but your opinion and your knowledge is just as important as my opinion and my knowledge. I mean, everybody is a contributor to the success of what we're working on. And so
Right.
I think these questions are excellent questions, because these are questions that we don't normally get. We live in a bubble.
I'm your end user who knows nothing. So
Yeah,
there you go.
Well,
exactly. And so
that's exactly it. Yeah,
yeah,
you're the end user that we don't get to speak to all the time, right? So to be able to have this conversation, people should see the value in it, and hopefully that brings them to listen to this and maybe ask some different questions when they do get in front of an end user or an owner, because they were listening to this, because we are so in our bubble, right, that I don't think about some of these things. Like I said, even at the big box store, I know what I need. I go grab that thing and I know what it does because I'm in the industry and I understand that. But the guy next to me who's just looking at 80 switches doesn't understand the difference between them, or that this works with that app or doesn't work with this thing or that. Like, yeah, it's hard.
and I think there's also something about our society, going from an even wider angle view, where we punish people for ignorance. We
Yeah.
don't actually say, "Hey, you're ignorant about this. Let's get you up to snuff. Let's figure out where your ignorances are and get you better." We're usually like, "Oh, you're stupid. What's wrong with you?" And so, I think there's a whole lot of benefit to be made by embracing people who have a lack of awareness. And so, like, this is something that my wife and I actually have a lot of discussion about where she always is like, "Hey Webster, you know so much about so many things," and it's like, yeah, because I'm curious. I like to learn. Whereas with her, she sometimes takes offense when she gets called out on something. It's like, "Hey, do you not know how to do this?" And it's like, whoa, this is now like this massive fight, because it's like, I'm not trying to say you're stupid. I'm just saying, hey, I recognize that you might not know as much as I do about this, and vice versa.
If you don't know, you don't know.
Exactly.
And if you don't know about controls, watch this podcast
or listen.
or listen.
But if you're watching, you get to see Scott in his snazzy tie. But yeah, I mean, we're almost out of time, so let's wrap this up and do a little recap here. But I mean, ultimately, from a layman's perspective, I mean, the question of, is our lighting controls taking off, is a valid one. I think, it's worth being asked again and again and again, not just right now, but in the past and the future, where are we with success? And when you look at the metrics, we have not taken off. If you look at the existing buildings in North America and whether or not they're implementing intelligent lighting control systems, it's like, what, 20% of implementation at best, maybe less. And so we have not taken off. We have not succeeded. We can purport that lighting controls are the best thing in the world, but if nobody believes us, what have we done? We've just screamed into the ether. And so, getting people who are less knowledgeable about this to be more knowledgeable about this, that gives us a better vehicle for awareness and outreach. And so we can't continue to live in these bubbles. We can't continue to just talk to each other and nod at each other and say, yeah, of course, if only these ignorant people knew better. We really need to do a better job of getting the word out there that intelligent lighting control solutions are a great option when done right. And I don't know if, Ron, you wanted to weigh in more on that. I mean, we've talked about
it's just there's so much to say, and there's so much about the whole having perspective from everybody. And Scott, thank you so much for coming on today and asking some of these questions that we don't normally ask. And I really do hope that some of our listeners and viewers maybe look at things slightly different just based on this conversation. Understand that, yeah, we are trapped in our bubble and we need to help educate, as we've said 1,000 times. And I know you've heard us say it so many times. Education really is the most important. And if that means that, not only as an industry, but as individuals, we can help other people around us understand some of these systems, there's going to be wider adoption in general. And just getting people to understand that there's more to it than it's just a light switch, right? And so I really hope everyone listening, I'm sure a lot of people have their opinions and point of views, and anyone who is listening to the podcast, if you'd ever like to be on the show, reach out.
Please.
Send Scott an email, send Webster and I an email. If you have an opinion or a thought or something we haven't discussed, or a different opinion from something that we've discussed, we'd love to hear from you. We'd absolutely love to hear from you. We love to have everyone's opinions. It just opens all of us in the industry up to being more adaptable and open with each other, and understanding that there's more than one way to handle lighting controls. And, the more we can get in front of people, the better. So, Scott, thank you so much for coming on. We absolutely could not do this show without you, as you mentioned, but you are absolutely a fantastic person. We love having you. It's been such a great experience to work with you for the last 14 months or so, and it's just
Let's
I really enjoy every single time. So thank you so much. Remind everyone that today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association,
and is financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. And again, check out our website. It's got all of our content and a news feed and a merch store. So it's definitely worth checking out, at least to see what it's like. But everyone, thank you so much for 50 excellent episodes. Looking forward to the next 50. Scott, thank you for being a guest and our excellent producer and just a great guy to chat with all the time. It's awesome having you on here finally to have everybody else hear your voice and your opinions. But until our next episode, thanks for joining us. See you next time.